Hi guys, in this tutorial we are going to be painting autumn leaves using watercolor. I recently went on a trip to Maine and it was so beautiful. The leaves were changing colors. I had never experienced the East Coast before. It's so beautiful. The leaves were incredible and I was totally inspired, so that is why we're doing this tutorial today. We will be painting 2 leaves. This is a sample that I did. We are going to be painting an oak tree leaf and also a maple tree leaf. You're gonna need a few supplies like usual. First, I like to work with 2 water cups, basically so I can keep cool tones and warm tones separate. That way we don't get murky colors, but our colors stay nice and vibrant. I always have a paper towel. I like to work on a watercolor block, but if you do not have a watercolor block, just make sure you have watercolor paper. It's absolutely necessary for making watercolor paintings. And if you aren't working on a block, make sure to use something like washi tape or masking tape to tape your paper down to whatever surface you're working on. And then of course we're gonna need brushes. I have a couple different sizes today. You do not need all of these sizes. I will say you wanna definitely have a size 6 or even a size 8 or 4 could work depending on how big you draw your leaf. And if it has a nice tip on it, you'll be totally fine. Otherwise, maybe grab something like a detail brush for smaller things. And we are actually gonna be using the back side of our brush today, so a smaller brush like this is more helpful. Then of course, we need our paint colors. Today we're gonna be working with some vibrant paint colors since the leaves are usually orange and red with some bright yellows. I have lemon yellow deep here. I have Scarlet Lake red. I know this is kind of mixed with a lot of other things, also dog hair. But you're gonna need a red, an orange. You could even do yellow ochre, and you are going to want as well some green. And the green we're gonna be adding yellow to, so it's nice and vibrant. And then maybe just a little bit of brown, which we can definitely make with all the colors here. And lastly, you're gonna need a pencil because you can't draw without a pencil. Okay, let's get started. We're gonna start off with this oak leaf. And the oak leaf has 7 points. And we're just gonna start by drawing that. I'm gonna draw a little bit darker so you guys can see, but try to draw as light as possible. So the oak leaf has these 3 points at top. They kind of look like a crown. And then it comes out here. And then this kind of comes down. And then we go out for, so think of it like a triangle. It's gonna have its furthest points on these 2 sides. And then there's another one down here that's a little bit smaller. Sometimes when you're struggling with drawing, breaking it down into shapes can be super helpful. So I'm just gonna continue on looking at this leaf, and you guys have it on the screen as well so that you can see. But you can literally pull up any picture of an oak leaf, or if you have one at your house, feel free to grab it. It doesn't have to be perfect, just the basic shape so you know what it is. And then they have these bottom ones down here. Okay. And the little stem. Now I made this giant triangle, so I need to clean this up a bit because it'll be a little bit confusing. And try to make, like I said, your lines as light as possible. Although we are using a little bit darker colors here, you don't want your pencil marks to shine through. And I'm just going around and getting this sketched in. They have all of these little points. And if you feel like this will be helpful for you, you can draw in the veins if that's helpful for you. For me, it's not helpful because I don't want my pencil lines in the middle, and I know it'll be easy for me to just draw those on there later. But if you need it, feel free to use it. Okay, I'm using a gummy eraser to just take up as much of that pencil as possible. Then the next leaf we're gonna do, I'm just bringing it up on my iPad, is the maple leaf. Feel free to grab a picture of your own or use the one that I have. And the maple leaf has 5 points, but this one kind of, those 2 little points at the bottom are kind of hard to see. The overall shape is almost like a teardrop, I would say, if you need to know what the shape is. So we have a point here, and then a point that comes up here, and then a point. With watercolor paper, I know I've mentioned this in previous videos, you don't want to be erasing it a lot because it ruins the texture of the paper. So if you're struggling right now and you feel like you're erasing your watercolor paper a lot, maybe draw it on another paper and practice first and then come back. That way you don't ruin that beautiful texture that soaks up the water on your paper. Okay. And the maple leaf kind of cups in at the bottom. It's just like a little half dome and another half dome. And it has these beautiful, beautiful veins, which I might just lightly put in, and I'll put in the other ones later. Okay, we have our basic sketches, and we are going to be using wet on wet technique, meaning we're gonna use a lot of water, and we are gonna cover this in water and then pop in our colors. And then after it dries, we are going to be using a wet on dry technique. So with the first one, I like to get all my paints nice and wet before I get started, because you don't want to start putting water all over this and then color and then realizing, oh no, I need to grab green and the green's not wet yet, and you basically lose your opportunity to add in the color that you want because your paper's dry. So when you're using wet on wet technique, you have to have your paper wet and obviously the paint is wet. So I am mixing up my yellow right now. Oops. I'm mixing up my yellow, and I'm just getting these nice and wet. And then I'm wakening up the red that I have here. You want the consistency to be, I would say, like butter, or kind of like an oil. It's a little bit thicker. You don't want it to be super thin because we want that vibrancy of the color. And I actually have a little bit of brown here, and I might wake that up a little bit just in case I need it. Then I am going to wake my orange up. And then lastly, the green. And the green, I am going to add a little yellow to, because that's the color that's on this first oak leaf. Okay. All right, looking at our leaf, we can see that we have yellow tones, we have orange, we have red, and we have green, and almost a brown. But what's gonna happen when the red and the green kind of mix is it's gonna create a little bit of a brown. But when you are looking at your subject, so autumn leaves are our subject today, you wanna find the lightest color, and that will be the color that you put on first. We are using wet on wet, so a lot of it will bleed, but we can work around that. But I just like to identify the lightest color first, because that's the first one that you're gonna put on there. Make sure you have clean water, and grab just water on your brush, and cover this entire oak leaf with water. Make sure you are getting these edges right up to the edge with water. It's like you're painting, but painting with water. So you don't wanna go outside of the lines. There shouldn't be any puddles. It should be just a nice sheen on your paper. If you're finding that there's puddles, I recommend drying your brush off on your paper towel, and then you can come back and go like this, and it'll pick up some of that water. And then again, dabbing on your paper towel. So don't do the stem, just do the leaf. We'll deal with the stem later. You could see I had a little bit of paint on my brush because it's slightly like yellow, but that's okay. Once this is completely covered in water, again, you want to have a nice sheen, but you don't want to see puddles. Water control is something you'll learn over time. It just is that way. Now I'm going to grab my yellow, and where I see yellow on my leaf, I'm just going to start popping it in. You don't want to fill every tiny little spot with the yellow because you want to have that nice like bleeding watercolor look. So I'm just dotting it in, and because it's all wet, it's kind of doing the work for me. It's moving really nicely. Okay, so those are the most yellow parts. Now I'm going to move into my orange. And where I see orange, I'm gonna dot that in. It's just so relaxing. I love wet on wet. When you're doing something like this, it's just meditative. There's just something about it, seeing the water kind of bloom. Okay, now we're going into red. So grab your red. You might want to mix your red with just the tiniest bit of blue if it's just feeling way too bright. But be careful because there's definitely, if you go too much blue, you're going to get purple. Okay. Now I'm just these areas up here at the tip of my brush. Oh, it looks like I actually did this wrong, but that's fine. I drew it wrong. That's okay. And I actually wanted this to be brighter, so I just grabbed a little bit more of the brighter red. But all the tips of this leaf have red on them, and that's what I'm doing is I'm just going in with the red. And because it's all still wet, it's gonna blend really nicely. And any area where I see red, I'm just lightly adding it in. Every time you do this, the leaves will look different. I just painted this leaf, the one that I showed you, and this one is gonna look totally different. But every leaf is unique in nature, and that's okay. It can look different. Okay, if you feel like you need to help your paint along a little bit, you can rinse off your brush and then kind of tap it on your paper towel and just lightly tap around to kind of move it if you feel like it needs it. Sometimes it's cool just to see how it dries. I might put a little more red right here. Okay. Now the last thing I'm gonna do is, well, not the last, but I'm gonna grab that yellow green. And you never want your brush to be dripping with paint. It should be nice and on there. If it's dripping, just touch your paper towel. Lightly dotting where I see these green areas. It's gonna change when you mix it with the orange or with the yellows and the red. Okay. Nice. We're gonna put in the veins right now. We're gonna come back and add finer details, but for the vein, grab your red color. I know the vein in this is yellow, but we're gonna make it red. And I want you to put a good amount of that red just at the bottom here. Then I want you to grab your smaller brush. This is a 2/0. And using the opposite side, you're gonna drag through to the top. And then you're gonna do the same thing to make these little veins. So I'm just dragging through the paint and following the veins that are on the leaf picture. And if you feel like you need more, you can add more paint down here. And we can also go over them with a brush later once this dries. But that will give you the basics of the veins. Awesome. So that is our oak leaf. We're not done with it. Don't worry. We're going to let this dry and then we're going to come back to it. So let's move on to the maple leaf. All right. Moving on to the maple leaf. This one is really just orange and red, but we can add some yellow too. Same thing, grabbing clean water. If your water's not clean, then switch it out because we want to have a good canvas. And we are just painting water all over our maple leaf. Making sure that we don't have any puddles, just a nice sheen. If you are working on a watercolor block, one of the things I like to do is pick it up and go like this, and you can usually see if there's any puddles and also if it's all covered with water. Wow, we've gotten so lucky. Benya has not barked one time. I probably just jinxed us. Okay, now that this is all wet, again, we're gonna start with our lightest color. I'm gonna grab a yellow, but I'm going to add a little bit of orange to it, so it's a little more golden toned like the picture that we're seeing, and actually a little yellow ochre in there. And again, I'm just going to lightly kind of poke in that color. Because this is all wet, it just flows really, really nicely. Brighten it up a little bit in some of these spots. Okay. And then moving on to my red. And I'm gonna add a little bit of orange to my red. And make sure my paintbrush does not have too much paint on it. Just come in here, and I'm using the tip of my brush to get some of these really pretty, this pretty texture that's on the side of the maple leaf. And then I'm gonna put some of that over here. And we'll have time, once this is dry, we'll come in and do some of the little finer details. But this is just the point where we're getting the background in nice. The leaf actually has a lot of brown spots on it, but I don't want to put the brown spots. Avoid the temptation to come in here and start blending all of this. It will make them look dull. I realized that I was just starting to try to blend everything, and while a little blending is okay, you don't want to blend too much because it will dull it out. Now we are going to use the same technique that we used over here to make the veins in the leaves. I'm grabbing some red and I'm just going to add it to the bottom right here. And then I am coming over and getting my smaller brush and just drawing a line with the back side of this. You can't go this way, you have to pull through the paint, just so you guys know. So pull through the paint. And then there's one over here. And over here. And there's also these little lines. So doing all of those is gonna make it look more realistic. If you start to run out of paint, you can add a little bit more down there. And then we can also, when we get into the wet on dry, we can add a lot more of this, but do what you can. Okay. I'm just thinking I might add a little orange to some of this. like I say with all my watercolor paintings, there is a point of no return. So make sure, I mean, you really don't know what that point is until you paint a lot. So if you hit it, it's okay. Just try again, but you don't want to overwork your artwork. And I think I'm starting to get to that point right now, so I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna take a little break and let this dry, so let your painting fully dry, and then we'll come back and we will do wet on dry and add some nice details to these leaves. Now that our leaves have dried, you can see, or I don't know if you can, but I can see that they dry a lot lighter. That always happens with watercolor. It's always gonna dry a lot lighter than what you see when you originally put it down. So I wanna add some more of that rich color in and give it just a little more interest to look at. I did grab my smaller brush, which is a size 2, but you can still, actually, you know what? I'm gonna stick with size 6 just for you guys, but make sure your brush has a good tip on it. I am getting that same red, but making it a little bit darker. And I'm gonna come in here and I'm using a wet on dry technique because this is dry and my paint is wet. And I'm just adding in some color here. Now maybe just watch for a second. So I just added in, it's some pretty thick saturated paint. I'm grabbing just water and I'm lightly moving it around. Just lightly. And to the edges here. And I'm gonna do that same thing on all the areas that I see in the picture that are kind of dark. You wanna be really careful that you don't let this dry before you come in here with just the water. I'm kind of using this circular motion to move it around. If it dries, it's not gonna move anymore. So you do have to work a little quickly. And what this is doing is just adding depth to our leaves. So now, you know, we had this lighter color, which we're still gonna have that there, but by adding these darker edges, it just makes it look more 3D. So again, I just have super saturated paint. I'm making these little outlines, and I'm coming back with just water and kind of spreading it around. You don't want too much water on your brush, but enough to get it moving. I also might bring in just a little bit into the center here. And because it's wet, I can just move it around ever so lightly. And maybe on one of these, I grab kind of a more orange tone. Just move it around. Going back to my red. Rinsing off my brush, getting just clean water, and helping it move along. One more side. And since this is wet in the middle, I'm gonna wait to come back to add just a little more saturation for the veins of our leaf. I wanna get a little more yellow in there. Just grabbing some yellow, and it's the same technique. It's not going to spread because it's dry now. So I have to make sure that it is a softer edge by getting just a damp brush and moving it around. Here. But if it touches that red that's already wet, of course it is gonna spread a little bit more. Lovely. I think I'm happy with this. I don't really want to emphasize more of the green because since the leaves are changing, the green is going to be the most faded part of any leaf that is in autumn. So I'm going to leave the green the way it is. One other thing you can do if you want, You can add a stem. I'm not gonna put a stem on this because I wanna use this for a pattern and the stems tend to get in the way a little bit. So this is how I'm going to leave this. I wanna add a little bit of darker just right here. It's wet, so it's gonna bleed nicely. I'm just gonna add a little bit more. I just really think that the red just looks so beautiful. Okay, awesome. So that leaf is done. Now we're gonna come over to our maple leaf and we're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start with my orangey yellow and just do on the edge with my very saturated paint, rinsing off my brush, then just getting it to move around. They kind of got quite dull once the paint dried on our first layer. So that's why I like to come in here and add in that nice bright color. Okay, moving on to red. I'm gonna come here, making this point here. I'm making sure that I work quickly so that my paint doesn't dry and I can't move it. Do the same thing over here. I think I'm gonna paint a lot more leaves after I'm done with this tutorial because I have all this space and they're just so fun. If you guys have any suggestions for tutorials, so this was wet because of the yellow, so that's why it's bleeding nicely like that. I like that. I think I'm just gonna let it be. It just brings in more of that bright saturated color. And over here, I might darken up my red a bit with a little bit of brown down here. You can totally add brown to your leaves or a more deep red, earthy red, I guess you would say. I'm so sorry about my squeaky chair. I just realized it's so annoying. I'm so sorry. I like to paint upstairs because the light's good, but our dining room table chairs are the worst. Okay, maybe just a tiny bit of red right here. I don't know, that might have been a mistake, but just help it move a little bit here. No, actually, I like that. Okay, here are our two leaves. And one last thing, you don't have to do this, but I kind of like to do it. I'm going to mix up a reddish brown. I'm using Sierra Brown, and I think this is Scarlet Lake, and just the littlest touch of green so it's not too bright red. Ooh, this is turning really brown. Oh well. Okay, and I'm not going to do every single line of the vein, but I'm going to just emphasize them a little bit more and like skip some little areas so it doesn't look too perfect. Some areas can be darker than others. You might be happy with the lines that we made with the back of our brush. That's totally cool if you are. But mine just needed a little more love. Okay, awesome. And the perfectionist in me is thinking, maybe add a little more dark. You guys could play with these all day, seriously, like, as you can see. That's the thing with layering too, the possibilities are just endless because sometimes the more layering you add, just the more and more beautiful it gets. But I'm also trying to teach you guys not to overdo your work, so I'm gonna stop. Okay, and then coming over here, make sure it's not too wet. And you're gonna do the exact same thing, but I'm gonna add a little more, almost making kind of like a mustardy color. Dark mustard. And the same thing. Just making the veins stick out a little bit more. I can tell that this is pretty wet still, so I have to be very careful or I'm just gonna get brown spots on my leaf. Yeah, I'm starting to just get brown spots. All right. Might add just a little more brown down here, maybe in this little corner. Okay, our autumn leaves are done. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you do paint along with me, please share your work on Instagram and tag me at Lavender and C. I always love to see what you guys create, and also please like and comment and let me know how you liked this tutorial or if you have any other suggestions. Thanks for watching.